ta'ala, we were speaking about Habib Umar completing yesterday's lesson, or beginning yesterday's lesson with regards to a person understanding that the goal and the purpose of the institutes, the goal and purpose of the da'wah, the goal and purpose of everything which a person does in calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no other objective other than fulfilling the duty that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed upon our shoulders and expending our utmost efforts in fulfilling this task given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many times you would hear Habib Umar himself talking about Dar al-Mustafa and saying that if the building of Dar al-Mustafa in itself is not effective in allowing people to meet the Prophet ﷺ in a felicitous state in the hereafter, then there has been no benefit in that. And so people should not get caught up with the forms of the da'wah, but the goal and the essence and the ruh of the da'wah is more important. We always mention how Shaykh Rahman used to say that when ideas are served, then the purpose of those ideas are fulfilled. But when ideas turn into institutes, then people start serving the institutes and they forget about the idea. And many times today, because of the nature of the world, people tend to need to work under organizations or names or affiliations or slogans, but that is never the goal. And the way to always measure whether the goal is being fulfilled is to ask oneself, is a person, am I getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What am I doing? And are people who are connecting to our organization or people connecting to our da'wah getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And if this is not the case, and if they are not getting closer to Allah and the Prophet ﷺ, then no matter how big that organization might be, how long it might have been run, then it has stopped fulfilling its purpose, and these people need to evaluate. And so Habib Umar is saying, we stop by saying وَبَذْلِ غَايَةِ الْوُسْعِ وَالْمُسْتَطَاعِ وَالْقُدْرَةِ كُلِّهَا فِي الْعَمَلِ بِشَرْعِ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى وَنَشْرِهِ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And then a person, after expending the utmost efforts in fulfilling the trust given to them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is the goal he then mentions for all of these institutes and the madaris and the ma'ahid and the da'wah that takes place? The second thing is to expend one's utmost efforts in establishing the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the earth. And we were mentioning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at every instance in a person's life has a khitab. He has an address to a person, right? And there are 5 khitab, one of 5 things that are always applicable to a person in each and every single instant in their life. There's either something that you need to do which is obligatory. So for example, if the time of dhuhr comes in, Allah's khitab, Allah's address to you is perform your dhuhr salah, for example. There's either something that is recommended for you to do, and we know of all the recommended acts. There is either something which is merely permissible. Merely permissible meaning if you do it, doing it and not doing it has no sin or reward, but if you do it with a good intention, you get the reward. Then there are things which are disliked for you to do, and then there are things which are haram or forbidden for you to do. And so these 5 things are constantly facing a person, or constantly coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a command that either do or don't do. And this is the way the usulis or the people of usul al-fiqh will try and explain the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that a Muslim in every aspect of his life, he is not free from responsibility. There is no such thing in this world that a person does not have responsibility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is why the Prophet described the world as, and this dunya is sijnul mu'min, it is a prison of the believer, because a believer cannot do what he wants. There's no such thing in Islam that a person can do whatever they want to. Right? This is a foreign concept to Islam. In the hereafter, that is when a person can do whatever they want to. And the whole purpose and battle and test of life is that, as Habib Umar explained in a few lessons ago, is that a person takes this free will that they have and they put it at the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Habib Umar is speaking about establishing the Sharia as well, سواء كان ذلك في دكان أو في سوق أو في سيارة أو في طائرة أو في مطار أو في مسجد أو في ملعب أو في رباط أو في معهد أو في مدرسة أو في دائرة حكومية إلى غير ذلك فالخادم يطلب ما هو أرضى لسيدي دائما. So in fulfilling the trust given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in spreading the Sharia, and when we talk of the Sharia, we're not talking of this narrow-minded concept that some people think that the Sharia is only the penal code of Islam or the punishments that are meted out to or because of criminal offenses. This is a very, very small aspect of the Sharia. And unfortunately, the enemies of Islam have tainted the Sharia with this particular image that when we talk of establishing the Sharia of Allah, then the image that comes in people's minds is images of cutting people's hands and the like. So there are two things that are required. One is for people to educate themselves what the Sharia is, and also the du'at and people in media, they need to be wise also in using terminologies. For example, if a certain terminology, we talk of the kalimat Sharia, has been tainted, if you are going to be speaking to people, it's senseless saying, I understand what the Sharia means and it has this broad-minded concept. But when I speak to an audience or I speak to people or non-Muslims, and I use the term Sharia without explaining to them this greater concept, obviously then this will create a negative image in their mind. Or what one needs to use is use a different terminology which is neutral. And the unfortunate thing when it comes to the media and da'wah is that Muslims have fallen very behind in that we have not been the ones at the forefront of the media. So we have not been the ones to be able to shape people's minds and hearts when it comes to understanding the Sharia. And so the motive and the technique and the strategy of the enemies of Islam is that those things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want from human beings, they have attacked it at every instance, and they have psychologically implanted in people's minds that this is evil. And so naturally, when a person hears about Islam, or hears about the Sharia, or hears or sees a picture of Muslims, then there is this internal rebellion or this internal aversion that happens. And the whole purpose of da'wah then is to refute these misconceptions. And unfortunately, da'wah is not refutation of misconceptions. Da'wah is connecting people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But because there are so many cobwebs in people's minds, so many misunderstandings, therefore, when a person decides to come or the person decides to learn, there is a long, long process of sometimes months, sometimes years of deconstructing, of unlearning, and then teaching people the essentials of their deen. And the best way for this to happen is that people or children from a young age connect themselves to traditional ulama who have this chains of narration where they learn authentic tradition in Islam from a young age. Then when they are affected or when they are exposed to different ideologies or thoughts, they know exactly what is pure and what is impure. But unfortunately, many people in today's times, their first exposure to learning about the deen is from the hands of the enemies of Islam or the Orientalists. And we find these people will pick up small issues of fiqh or small issues of different sorts of law, and then they think that this is a problem with the Sharia, whereas they haven't even studied the Sharia. And then people want to challenge the Sharia in ulama that have done khidmah for the Sharia for over 1,300, 1,400 years. Many of the issues that comes to people's minds or people read on the internet or, it's in vogue in terms of these questions, they have been dealt with from almost 1,000 years ago. The fuqaha, there's not a single issue with regards to the Sharia that exists except that the ulama have actually dealt with this. In fact, they have dealt with it in such a way that they say there are 2 or 3 books, one in fiqh, the Shafi'i fiqh, and one in the Hanafi fiqh, Ibn Abidin, in the Hanafi fiqh, and the Tuhfa of Ibn Hajar in the Shafi'i fiqh. They say that these ulama was so sharp that when they would write the ahkam and the laws, commentary on the books of fiqh, they would hypothesize. And they would say, if this particular thing happens, then what would the law be? And if this particular thing happens, what would the law be? And they say that a person through analogy can extract from these 2 books all of the ahkam that will exist until the day of Qiyamah, even by analogy. So there are no new concepts which will come, and except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already put in place strategies that the ummah would need and have, and laws that they know how to maneuver those new strategies. So there's nothing new that Islam cannot cannot answer. And so when Habib is speaking about establishing the Sharia in all aspects of our lives, he says about the dukan, a person's shop and their trade, and the souk, a person in the businesses, in corporate world. A person needs to know the laws and the rules of business. Why? For example, a simple thing like one of the laws of the Sharia is a person does not sell an item until he has taken possession of it. If you buy something and it is being transported to you, you cannot resell that item until you actually take possession of it in your hand, either physically or you make wikala, you make someone your representative to take possession of it on your behalf. If you don't do this, that income that you are now earning is unlawful for you, or it is doubtful for you, and that will also have an effect, a spiritual effect on your ibadah and your worship, because if your income is lawful, then the food that you're eating is not lawful, and likewise your body will be nourished with that which is unlawful. Your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be sound. And so such a person who doesn't even know the laws of business, but he wants to do a lot of ibadah and worship and ta'ah and dhikr, he will never reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he will never gain an understanding and ma'rif of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the very high levels. Because when we talk of the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is first the sharia, then the tariqah, then the haqiqah. So the aspects of the sharia. Imam Ghazali says a person needs to become istiqlalan fil madhab. He needs to become independent in one madhab, meaning he needs to have a complete understanding of one madhab from cover to cover, not just ibadah. So for example, when Habib was speaking about business, all the business aspects with regards to the laws of Islam, a person needs to become aware of it. And there are different topics and there are different books. A very, very good book that exists in the Shafi'i fiqh is The Reliance of the Traveler by Shaykh Keller. It's in English, it's available also. A person just browses through the contents page and looks at the extent to all the different topics and just the topic headings, for example, in business, right? Putting up collateral, or there's entire chapters on rent, there's entire chapters on paying in advance, there's entire chapters on the different aspects of business when it comes to marriage as well, when it comes to interactions. So our interactions with our homes, our spouses, our children, our family and friends, also relatives, right? What are the rights that these people have upon us and what are our rights upon them when it comes to husband and wife as well, when it comes to marriage. The society, what are those things in society which is obligatory for me to do and which is if fard ain, fard al-kifaya. So if a person is not or does not have a daily or a regular study of the Sharia in a very basic form, then the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always be they'll always be falling short, or they will never be able to reach the higher levels of connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of the spiritual realms, because of this foundation not being established. And so everyone wants this Sharia to be established in a person's he says in the shop, in the souk, or in one's car. One is driving in the car. How does one establish the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when one is driving a car? What is the laws of the Sharia with regards to driving, with regards to the road? Does Islam, if you're living in a non-Muslim country, do you have to obey the robots, obey the traffic signs, or you don't have to do that? With regards to the traffic officers, do you have to obey them or not obey them? These are all things the Sharia speak about. أو في طائرة, likewise in a plane, أو في مطار, or in an airport, أو في مسجد, أو في ملعب, or in a masjid, or a playground, أو في رباط, at an institute, أو في معهد. رباط is a center of learning, معهد an institute, أو في مدرسة, right? Or in a school, or في دائرة حكومية, or in any government offices. How do we establish the Sharia in all of these aspects? Establishing the Sharia, I mean, in its widened sense, is that the people that we are interacting with, we connect them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we connect them to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we make them realize that in all of these aspects, we and them are obligated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in performing our duties in all of these different fields in a way which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated. فَالْخَادِمُ يَطْلُبُ مَا هُوَ أَرْضَى لِلسَّيِّدِ دَائِمًا. Right, and then Habib goes back to in the beginning when he said to the students, none of you should go back to your countries with anything else in their minds except that they are a servant and a slave of Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, and the Sharia. And then he ends this paragraph by saying that the servant or the slave is always seeking what is most pleasing to his Lord. I think there are two types of slave. They say there's abd su, and abd su is a slave, but the slave only does work when you beat him. So you might tell a servant or a slave to do a certain job, but they don't do it until you scream, shout at them, might have to beat them, might have to. Right? And we should think of ourselves in our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are we a type of abd so that we don't fulfill the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except under much difficulty, or unless we are reprimanded? And then there is a servant who goes even beyond. You tell the servant to do one, but he does 1, 2, and 3 because he knows that this is most pleasing to you. So likewise, in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to always be seeking what is most pleasing to him. لا يقر نفسه على ميل لثناء الناس. Habib is telling the students, it should never be established in your hearts, or they should never find place in your hearts any leaning to receiving praise from people. ولا على استعداد بمدح الناس. So not leaning towards receiving praise from people, and not leaning towards even finding pleasure in being praised by people. One is a person doesn't want to be praised, and that's fine. But then there is the aspect of a person not wanting to be praised, but when he is praised, he's happy, and he feels like, okay, now this is the objective. Or the fact that he feels happy when he is praised, even though he didn't want to, is a proof that he was not sincere. وَعَلَى الْتِفَاتٍ لِمَنْزِلَةٍ فِي قُلُوبِ النَّاسِ. And he has no leanings, or he doesn't concern himself with seeking any place in people's hearts, right? And this is the love for fame, the love for name. Imam Ghazali, when he speaks about this, he says, what is this love for name and fame? It is not to be famous or to be known. It is to have a place in people's hearts. The love for fame is for a person to have a place in other people's hearts. And Habib is saying here that there should be no inclination at all to even seeking or wanting a place in people's hearts. And why is this? Because if a person is seeking a place in people's hearts, obviously that means they are not sincere, and they're not doing their work for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا عَلَى مُورِدٍ لِغَرَضِ النَّفْسِ. Nor should they be doing anything for the sake of the ego, or for the sake of the hawa. If a person is seeking a place in people's hearts, generally that can even mean, we'll give someone a typical example. I mean, if sometimes a person he cannot be in front of people. It doesn't mean he has to be in front of people. Through the written word, for example, whenever a person writes, a person can be writing something, right? A letter or a book or anything else, and this letter or this book, someone else in a different part of the world, you don't even know who this person that is reading this book is. But there's a desire in the heart that whoever reads this will become acquainted with me or will appreciate the author. Anything that seeking a place in people's hearts, it means that a person is not seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this regard, we would find there is a group of Sufis, they are called the Malamitiya. And obviously this is not acceptable in the Sharia from a perspective of people doing something which will create a problem in society for themselves, especially if they are in the field of da'wah. But this would happen under the guidance of certain mashayikh. So what they would do is they would go and purposefully do things which would destroy the image in front of people's eyes. And so, for example, one of them, if in his spiritual training or he had reached a high spiritual level, he would go to the Jum'ah Salah, read in the last safs, he would take a bottle of alcohol or beer, it would be completely washed and purified. He'd put water in there, and immediately after the Jum'ah Salah, he will stand in front of the Jum'ah of the masjid, the Jami, the masjid, and he'd pretend to be drunk, and he'd be pretending to be drinking this alcohol or this beer. And the people obviously would come and see him and beat him up and disparage him and swear him and think that he is the worst thing in the world, whereas there is nothing actually that he had done wrong. Obviously, no one should actually do this, but they would do this just showing the extent to which people would go to put themselves down. Now, take that many degrees down. How many times in the way we do things with people, even sometimes just in the way when speaking, the tone of voice that we use, right? Or in sending messages, or in using any technology that we have, or in our business dealings, in our interaction with our families. What do we do in which we are seeking place in people's eyes? Whereas the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would always try not to seek a position in people's eyes, and some of them would go to the extent of doing things in which would leave, we can say, sort of a bad taste in people's mouths, but they've protected the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Rifa'i, the great Imam, and the famous incident that happened that when he went to Medina al-Munawwara and he greeted the Prophet ﷺ, and with these lines of poetry he used to say, I used to send my greetings to you from afar, and now that I am in front of you, put forth your hand so that I may kiss your hand. And they say 10,000 people witnesses. This is written in the history books that they witnessed the hand of the Prophet ﷺ extending from his grave, and Imam al-Rifa'i then kissed the hand of the Prophet ﷺ. If I'm correct in recalling, that is Imam Rifa'i. What did he do immediately after that? Right, and because all these people saw this and he had been given this great honor, he went into the door leading out of the area where the Rawda is, and he put his face on the ground, and he asked everyone to walk by to put their feet on his face. Why? In a sense of putting himself down, not seeking, obviously not wanting pride to come into his heart, but also not wanting to think that he is better than anyone else, and even in having reached this honor, but also in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having manifested that at his hands. نعم. ولا التفات لمنزلة في قلوب الناس ولا على مورد لغرض النفس ولا يزال يجتهد ويطلب من ربه الثبات. And he does not lean towards anything of the ego, one's hawa, and he is constantly striving, right, and seeking steadfastness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person, the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are never safe, no matter how long they've been doing da'wah, no matter how long they've been teaching, no matter how long they've been doing what they've been doing. They are constantly seeking steadfastness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because, as we always mention, فَلَا يَأْمُنُ مَكْرَ اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْقَوْمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ. None feel safe from the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala besides those who are losers. وَيَتَجَلَّ هَذَا فِي حُسْنِ انطِوَائِكُمْ فِي الَّذِينَ سَبَقُكُمْ. How does one then achieve this? How does one remain steadfast? يَتَجَلَّ هَذَا, this will be manifested في حسن انطوائكم في الذين سبقكم. الانطواء means to fold up. So if you have, for example, a cloth or a towel, and you put one over the other and then you fold them up, this is called intiwa. And Habib is saying, if you have this intiwa, if you have this complete folding up and following of those who have come before you, your predecessors, the ulama, and the awliya of the past, basically your sanad going back to the Prophet ﷺ. If you have this intiwa that I am not the one that is doing, I am merely fulfilling this role that has been given to me, I'm passing the baton on to those after me, meaning that I am not important. The da'i has to always have, and a scholar, a person that wants to work for the deen has to always have this concept that I am not important, but the message that I'm carrying and the message I'm conveying is more important. So if I have to die, if I have to be sacrificed, it is no problem. And if there's someone that is more worthy than me also, then it's no problem. We can give that responsibility onto them. And this is the difference between people who do the work because of understanding that they are fulfilling a responsibility and that the message is more important, right? And people that think that they are more important than the message. And we can find this clearly in the way in which the da'wah is done, the way in which these people would talk, would teach, and that some people are calling to themselves. They're teaching the Sharia, but it is always calling to themselves, or calling to their organizations, or calling to their cults, or calling to their ways, and they're not calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not calling to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the way a person receives or a person achieves steadfastness is this intiwa, is emulating those that came before them. وَنِيَّتُكُمْ فِي جَمْعِ الْقُلُوبِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالتَّآلُفِ بَيْنَهُم. Right? The second aspect is, if you have the sincere intention in joining the hearts of the believers and creating amicability amongst them, then the da'wah will always take place in a way which is most conducive. Anything in the da'wah, anything at all, if it's going to lead to dissension, if it's going to lead to disunity, if it's going to lead to infighting, then it ought not to be done, even though it might be something which is permissible. Right? And many times they'll say, give up your haqq, give up your right. For example, a person who is a parent or is in a marriage, many times, there is a person has to give up. Sometimes you might be in the right, but for the sake of the greater good, you've got to give up your haqq, give up your right, and allow peace to reign. So in society and between our organizations and between all of whatever we are doing, if a person's intention is that we should always be joining the hearts of the Muslims and creating amicability and friendliness amongst them, then in the way they do the da'wah, this will show. And they'll be willing to overgo and forego many of their rights, and also bear with patience whatever people might do to them for the sake of the unity of the Ummah. And the unity of the Ummah is more important than any organization or any person. وفي القيام بشرع الله تبارك وتعالى ونصرة دينه. This also then this will be manifested in a person to their best ability, you trying to the best of your ability to establish the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your spheres of influence. ونصرة دينه, and assisting his deen and his religion in the best way possible. ومعاداة أعدائه ممن يعادي المسلمين من نصارى أو يهود ومن والاهم. And now Habib is going to speak about another aspect. So he's saying this can be manifested, a person can achieve these goals by being emulating those that came before, having the intention to join people's hearts, always connect them to Allah and keep them with amicable relationships amongst themselves, and performing the Sharia to one's best ability in one's spheres of influence, and assisting the deen of Allah. Then he says, وَمُعَادَاتِ أَعْدَائِهِ, taking the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as enemies. مِمَّنْ يُعَادِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, especially those who are at war or are at enmity with the Muslims, from amongst the disbelievers, but especially the Nasara, the Christians and the Jews, وَمَنْ وَلَاهُمْ, and those who follow them. So in understanding and establishing Islam, and Islam is about peace, Islam is about love for the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but at the same time we are a balanced religion, right? A person has to love those whom Allah loves, and he has to hate those whom Allah hates. And so there are people that a person has to have an enmity in their hearts against, and those are the enemies of Islam, and especially Shaitan and his ilk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌ فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًا, that Shaitan is your enemy, so take him as an enemy. And do you like your enemy or do you hate your enemy? You would like guidance for him, but adawat, there is enmity between you. Allah says, فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًا, Allah says, take him as an enemy, right? And obviously Shaitan has his crew from amongst also human beings, and the people that follow him, and the systems and organizations and ideologies that exist in serving Shaitan. As a Muslim, we need to have adawah, we need to have enmity between us and these people. Obviously, there are non-Muslims who are not particularly at enmity with Islam, right? And the Quran also sets the yardstick of measure, that there is nothing wrong in dealing with these people who do not desire evil for you, dealing with them amicably and treating them with justice, right? But those, Allah tells the Prophet in the Quran, those who turned you out and those who are at enmity, then to not take them as friends. And so it is also mentioned on the day of Qiyamah, a person will come with many good deeds. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he will be taken to account because he did not take as a friend those people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took as friends, and he did not take as an enemy those people whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took as enemies. So he'll say, did you love those whom Allah loved, and did you hate those whom Allah hated? So also in one's emotions, the Sharia is there to bring balance, and the Sharia is there to also teach you how to be balanced. But where does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want your emotions? Over and above your thoughts and your aqidah and your creed, your belief. فَنَكُونُ حَرْبًا لِمَنْ حَارَبَ وَسِلْمًا لِمَنْ سَالَمَ. Right? So we are at war with those who declare war on us, and we are at peace with those who declare peace with us. And this is the dua of the Prophet ﷺ as well, and it's read every day in the khulasa before the Fajr Salah, or the dua at the time of Fajr, that we ask to be at peace with those who are at peace, and to be at war with those who take you as an enemy. Now, نحب بحبه الناس ونعادي بعداوته من خالفه من خلقه. This is the dua also of the Prophet ﷺ made, that we love through the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all people whom Allah loves, we love them. وَنُعَادِ, and we take as enemies through the enmity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these people who contradict his who contradict his Sharia and contradict his way, no matter who they are from amongst creation. مَا نُوَالِي نَصْرَانِيًا. We do not take as patrons and friends the Christians, وَلَا نُوَالِي كَافِرٌ, nor the disbelievers, وَلَا نُوَالِي فَاجِرٌ. We do not take as patrons. And nuwali is the sense of patronage, or a sense of, for example, if you have a friend, right, and they do something wrong, you say, you know what, it's fine, I'll overlook this. They're my family. We'll sort it out amongst ourselves, right? This wala is that it's an affiliation in that you ascribe yourself. So when you are part, when you form an organization and you say, I belong to this particular organization, there is this wala that's there. Meaning, even if the organization or people in the organization do something wrong, you don't now disassociate yourself. You take everything there and you deal with your internal disputes on your own. So this wala, with also with regards, there's no wala for a Christian, a Jew, a disbeliever, a transgressor. وَلَا نُوَالِي فَاسِقًا. We do not even have patronage with those who are transgressors of the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يَكُونُ تَبَعَ قُوَّةٍ أَوْ دَوْلَةٍ أَوْ حَاكِمٍ أَوْ مَحْكُومٍ كُلُّهُمْ فِي نَظَرِنَا سَوَاءٌ. No matter who this person is, if this person is an enemy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he is our enemy, right? They can even be presidents of countries, right? Or hakimin, rulers, or mahkumin, they can be those who are being ruled in those countries, governments, no matter who they are. Kullun fi nadarina sawa. Habib is saying they are all equal in our eyes. Our yardstick of measure is where the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lies. In anyone that is in enmity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are at enmity with them, no matter who they are. From the top to the bottom of society, right? If they are at enmity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are our enemies. Mizanul wala indana wahid. The scale of measure when it comes to patronage and wilaya, or al-wala, is one. Right? Man kana fi mardatillahi wa ta'atihi fa huwa sahibun lana. Whoever is in the good pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fa huwa sahibun lana. Then he is our friend and he is our companion. Yakunu miskina, no matter who that is. He can be a poor, he can be a destitute, he can be even a vagabond, someone that is not even regarded as being anything in society. But if he's in the pleasure and obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he's with us. Or hakimun or muhkumun. And then if he is a ruler or one who is ruled, if he's in the pleasure of Allah, then we take him as our patron. كلهم سواء. They are all equal. ومن يخالف أمر الله فهو عدو لنا يكون من يكون. And whoever contradicts the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and goes against the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he is an enemy of ours, and he can be whoever that is. Be whoever he is, faqirun, whether he is poor or rich, or ghaniyan, or waziran, or amirun, whether he is a minister, or he is a prince, or ma'muran, kulluhum sawa. Right? He is a ruler or a ruled, no matter who he is. If he is contradicting the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he is our enemy. And also when we talk about an enemy, meaning there is no wala. And when we speak of enmity, right? We're not necessarily speaking you should go and physically harm these people, right? But enmity means that there is a sense of aversion in the heart in following their ways, in liking what they like, in doing what they do. So some people, they'll talk about, we are, and they want to do jihad and want to do all of these things, but they're sitting and their homes are filled with all the pollution of the kuffar. They watch their movies, they wear their clothes, right? They speak their speech, they listen to their music, but they want to establish jihad. That is, this is a concocted idea, right? Jihad can never be established unless people are connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the true jihad will never be established unless people have reached that sense in which their hearts are able to distinguish between the people of Allah, the true people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we say take them as enemies, take their lifestyles, have an aversion to their lifestyles, have an aversion to their ways and mannerisms and customs, have an aversion to their media, which is all of the things that they are doing which are against the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have an aversion to those things that they are spreading which cause immodesty and lewdness. Have an aversion to anything which is against the Sharia. And the Prophet ﷺ also, there are good things, even when he described the Romans in the hadith of the end of times, he described the good qualities that they have. So if there are good qualities, a person can learn from those good qualities, but the evil, a person has to have an aversion to them. تصادفون منهم دعوات. Habib is then explaining to these students who will be graduating, he says, you will then be approached by them, right? فلا تستجيبوا لها. Do not answer their call. تزين لكم أنكم بالمظهر تخدمون الدين. They will make it seem, or uh, they will adorn this understanding, or they'll make it seem that if you want to do khidmah of the deen, then you have to have a status amongst people, and it has to be with a mother. Mother is, you have to be a certain personality, and you have to have a certain way in organization. Whereas most of the people who are actually serving the deen, they don't have anyone, they are singular on their own, and they are doing things that no one even knows about it. وأنكم بالتقدم على الغير تحافظون على الشريعة, and they will try to convince you that you have to vie with other people, and in vying that, for example, your organization is at the foremost and you get the most funding, and that you are at the forefront. This is the way that you can only serve the Sharia, right? And this is the way of Shaitan, that you can only serve the Sharia if your organization has the biggest numbers, or if you are at the forefront, or if you are getting the biggest funding, or because you are in this position. And that is absolutely not the case. فَلَا تَسْتَجِيبُ لَهَا. Do not answer this call of theirs. كَذَّابَ, they are liars. قُولُوا لَهَا. Say to them, مَعَنَا دَعْوَةٌ مِنَ الصَّادِقِ الْمَصْدُوقِ. We are carrying the da'wah of الصَّادِقُ الْمَصْدُوقِ, the one who was truthful and who was attested to for his trustworthiness. نُخَالِفُ دَعْوَتَكُمْ. We will contradict what you are calling us to. فَلَا نَقْبَلْ مَا دَعَوْتُمُونَ إِلَيْهِ وَنَرُدُّ دَعْوَةَ حَبِيبٍ الرَّحْمَنِ صلى الله عليه وسلم. And there is no way that we will accept what you are calling us to and reject that which the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم called us to. اقطعوها عنكم واقبلوا دعوة النبي وحده وعملوا بها. Habib Umar is explaining to the students, he says, cut off your heart's connections to what they are calling you to, and turn wholeheartedly to the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, and practice and establish it, which is the da'wah what he explained earlier, fulfilling the trust and responsibilities in the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, connecting people to Allah. Anytime in da'wah, if a person starts worrying about money, a person starts worrying about status, starts worrying about fame, starts worrying about how the organization is being affected, then a person has lost track of the goal. And a true person, no matter how big his organization is or how big his following is, if for the sake of the da'wah it means that all of that is dropped at an instant, he will be willing to do that, because if he understands obviously the true objective of the da'wah. هذه الدعوة ما قامت إلا على الصدق والصبر والتضحية والاحتمال من أولها. This da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, when Habib is now telling the students, do the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, he's saying this da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, it was not established except upon truthfulness, والصبر, patience, والتضحية, sacrifice, والاحتمال, bearing and forbearing great difficulties من أولها, from its inception. من أول خطواتها في مكة المكرمة, from its first steps in Mecca. ماذا كان عمل دعوة? What was the work of da'wah? From its inception in Mecca, what was the work of the da'wah? هل هناك مباني بناها, right? In the inception of the da'wah, were there any institutes or any buildings with the Prophet ﷺ built? هل هناك مظاهر تظاهر بها? Were there any manifestations of religion, paraphernalia of da'wah which were manifested? Of course not. وَمَكَثَ 3 سنوات لا يستطيع الجهر. The Prophet ﷺ stayed for 3 years, he was not even able to proclaim the call openly. حتى جاءه الأمر وجهر, until the command came and then he began to proclaim the call openly. وَمَاذَا جَرَى لِبِلَالٍ, and then what happened when he did that? What then happened to Sayyidina Bilal رضي الله عنه? وَمَاذَا عَمِلُوا مَعَ عَمَّارٍ وَأَبِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ, what did they then not do to Sayyidina Ammar رضي الله عنه and his father and his mother Sayyidina Yasir and Sayyidina Sumayya? It's well known the difficulties that they bore on account of the da'wah. هَكَذَا الدَّعْوَةِ, this is the da'wah, bearing the difficulties. حبسوه صلى الله عليه وسلم في الشعب, they contained the Prophet ﷺ. حبسوه is sort of when they send the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba to the Sha'b, Bani Talib, right? They enclosed them in the Sha'b, and they prevented food and water and even the Quraysh from doing business with them. حبسوه صلى الله عليه وسلم في الشعب وذهب أصحابه في الحبشة, And then his companions went to Abyssinia. أحيانا يكاد يخنقوه عليه الصلاة والسلام. The Prophet ﷺ, in the beginning of his da'wah in Mecca, they would also, when he would perform salah, they would come and choke him with the shawl or the cloth. They would choke him until he would almost die. وأحيانا يضعون السلا فوق ظهره وهو في السجود. And sometimes they would come and put the entrails of slaughtered animals on his back while he was in sujood. This was all what the da'wah was established upon. This difficulty and this bearing with patience, the pain and the enmity of the enemies. هذه دعوة تضحية وبذل. So anyone that wants to do the da'wah, right? What is the da'wah? It is the da'wah of sacrifice and the da'wah of paying the price. ما شيء في الدعوة مظاهر. There's no such thing in da'wah as مظاهر, doing things for fame or for name. ولا مفاخر, becoming proud and arrogant. ولا جلب مال, or collecting money from people. هكذا قامت الدعوة وهذا تاريخ دعوتنا. These difficulties that the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba went through, this is in essence the da'wah. And this is the history of our da'wah. وأيام الصبر في مكة. The Prophet ﷺ, his days in Mecca were built upon much patience. وَالسَّبَبُ فَتْحِهَا. These days of patience, those 13 years in which the Prophet ﷺ was patient in Mecca, that was the reason for the conquest of Mecca, right? And so much of the difficulties, and that is why the awliya, when they see difficulties come upon the ummah, they give glad tidings that this is now a hope that openings will come. According to the amount of difficulties that people go through, the openings and the relief will come. بل وفتح العالم بعدها. So these difficulties which the Prophet ﷺ went through in the Sahaba in Mecca, right, and all the difficulties that they were undergoing, the trials, those that were killed, those that were tortured, placed rocks and boulders on their stomachs in the hot desert stand, that was the cause of not just ultimately then the conquest of Mecca, but of Islam reaching you and me, and Islam reaching all the ends of the world. And if a person does not feel this responsibility, feel this connection that we are indebted to the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba for what they did for our Islam, then a person has not understood the da'wah and the connectedness of the da'wah. We are only Muslim today because of the Prophet ﷺ going through those difficulties in Mecca and the Sahaba bearing those difficulties in Mecca. بل وفتح العالم بعدها فهذا تاريخ دعوتنا من بدايتها. And so this is the history of our da'wah from its inception. دعوتنا دعوة الوفاء. What is our da'wah? What is our core? دعوة الوفاء, right? Fulfilling our trusts. دعوة الوفاء بالعهد. Fulfilling our covenants with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وبذل والعطاء. Expending the utmost of one's efforts. والعطاء. Giving for the sake of the da'wah. If people want to work in the time of da'wah, we don't go and ask people for money, right? You spend what you have. Whatever you can spend, that's what your responsibility is with regards to the da'wah. والتضحية, sacrificing. والإيثار, preferring other people over yourselves. والصبر, and patience. والاحتمال, bearing with patience difficulties that are placed upon you. والزهد, asceticism, not turning towards the world. والرغبة فيما عند الله, and preferring that which is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over what is with people. فكل ما قام على غير هذا الأساس ليس من الدعوة. Anything that is established on other than these foundations, this is not da'wah. وليس بمتصل بسر هذه الوراثة, and it is not connected to the secret of this inheritance. كم نعاني من النفوس هذه. How much aren't we complaining, or do we complain about the nufus and the egos of people? Because it is these egos of people that obstruct the da'wah. Allah yuslihna wa yu'ti nufusana taqwaha. May Allah correct ourselves, our souls, and may He grant our souls its taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ما المقصود من هذه الدراسة ومن هذه الدعوة? What is the purpose of these lessons and of this da'wah? وما المقصود من هذا العلم والتعليم كله? What is the purpose of these lessons and this teaching? والصادق مع الله إذا قيل له اذهب إلى جنوب ذهب جنوب. A truthful person, one who is truthful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if it is said to him, go to the north, go do da'wah in the north, go to this place, go to that place, ذهب جنوبا, he goes immediately. أو قيل له اذهب إلى الشمال, right, sorry, اذهب إلى الجنوب, go to the south, he goes to the south. أو قيل له اذهب إلى الشمال ذهب شمال. If it is said to him, go to the north, he goes to the north. حيث ما تريدنا, wherever you want us to go, we are ready to go. Wherever the da'wah needs you to be, you will be. هكذا الدعوة. This is the da'wah. أما الذي يضع له 20 غرضا أمامه لنفسه فهذا ليس بجندي لله. As for the person who puts 20 excuses or goals or objectives, I can only do this, I can only go do the da'wah here if I have this, or if I have this, or if this is available and this is not appropriate and it's not the right time. He says this is not a soldier of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is not a person that understands da'wah, بل هذا جندي نفسه. This person is a soldier of his own ego and of his own caprice. فإن الجندي لله. Where are the soldiers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? قال صلى الله عليه وسلم لأصحابه, the Prophet said to the Sahaba, اذهبوا إلى الحبشة, go to Abyssinia. أيعرفون من في الحبشة? Did the Sahaba know who was in Abyssinia? هل لهم غرض هناك? Did they have any objective that they were going to fulfill there? لا يعرفونهم ولا يعرفون طبائعهم. They didn't know who was in Abyssinia, they didn't know the people that were there, they didn't know their dispositions. ولا يعرفون عاداتهم. They did not even know their habits and customs. لا لهم أصحاب ولا لهم أصدقاء. They didn't have any companions or friends there. غرباء, they were complete strangers. But خرجوا امتثالا لأمره, they left, right? As soon as the Prophet told them to, they left, fulfilling his commandment. حتى بعض بناته صلى الله عليه وسلم خرجنا معهم. Okay, there was also some of the daughters of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. Okay, Sayyidina Ruqayya left with her husband, Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, they also went to Abyssinia. فارقوا الوطن, they left their countries. فارقوا المكان, they left their places, their abodes and residences. وبعد ذلك جاءت الهجرة إلى طيبة. And then afterwards also the immigration to Medina. وأيام كان في طيبة ما الذي حصل? And while the Prophet was in Medina, what happened? كلما جلس فترة خرجت السرايا التي يبعثها صلى الله عليه وسلم. Right? They wouldn't sit or wouldn't rest for a while until there was another expedition to go out. Besides the great battles, there were always expeditions, right? When the historians calculated the amount of expeditions that the Prophet ﷺ went for in Medina, it worked out to one every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, they were gone out for an expedition. If a person has been sitting in their home and they haven't gone out for da'wah, haven't left the comfort of their homes for the da'wah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in every 2 weeks, in at least a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, then what do we have to claim that we are concerned about this deen? We are just living our lives day to day, and we haven't left any of our comforts or comfort zones, right, for the sake of the da'wah. Even if it means just going to a different locality or a different place. And this is why also in Dar Mustafa, every single week, the students would go to a different locality, go sleep in that masjid, and go and speak to the people, remind people about their duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean going and talking to people, just going and meeting Muslims, but you have that concern in your heart. Go to a different street, go to a different extension or a different part of your neighborhood, and just go and speak and meet people. But this concern is that to be concerned of the believers and their states, and if they are non-Muslims that we are interacting with, then what is our strategies in interacting with them? If we have non-Muslim neighbors, and up to today, Habib Umar once walked when he was on one of his da'wah trips, and he met people that was living in a certain country. He says, how long have you been living in this country? He said, 30 years. He says, in this particular locality, he says, 30 years. What's the population of Muslims in this locality? He says, Muslims are very small. They're about maybe 2% in this particular locality. He says, how many people have accepted Islam with your hands in 30 years? The person was quiet. He says, 30 years you are in a place and not a single person has accepted Islam on your hands. What have you been doing? What is your duty? If you send someone for a mission, for example, you send your son or you send your business associate, you say, okay, go and establish this business in a different country. You come after 30 years and he hasn't done anything. He's just been sitting and playing around, eating, drinking, and having fun. What will you think of such a person? Likewise, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has placed us in the countries that we are, who has placed us in a non-Muslim country, who has placed you in between non-Muslim neighbors, who has placed you in a work which has non-Muslim friends, who has placed you amongst people that might be not reading their salah, or not. And if Allah has placed you in these positions, He is the one that placed you there. What is your responsibility to Him with regards to all of these people that you are interacting with? Okay. وبعد ذلك جاءت الهجرة لطيبة وأيام كان في طيبة من الذي حصل كلما جلس فترة خرجت السرايا الذي يبعثها. So every 2 weeks, so Islam and also Hajj teaches you this, that one should never rest. One should never be in a state of comfort. One has to be constantly moving, because water, when it is still, it becomes stagnant. The person needs to constantly be moving for the sake of the da'wah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Subhanakallahu wa bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. فاتنا صلاة السلام على حضرة النبي.